Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. My complex problem is the pay gap between professions. To start out, we're going to look at the importance of this complex problem. So, this complex problem is important because it impacts men and women every day. It impacts the economy, disparities of workers, there's separation between workers, there's tension between professions, and the pay gap is getting bigger and no one seems to notice or care, really. So, in today's age, it is never seen between professions. It is always the gender pay gap, and while this aspect is truthful, the pay gap between professions is equally important. An example. A registered nurse in Ohio makes an average of $70,000 a year, while the average NBA player makes nearly double or even triple. And this begs the question of why is that? Why is it important to look at this gap? Compared to the nurse, the sports celebrity has a wider reach, potential revenue from ads and commercials, and has little impactful value at little cost. Now, the nurse has more value but has less of a reach, thus making her be paid less. For job marketers, this aspect can be crucial because no one usually looks at it. It can affect household income, relationships between professions, family relationships, and even can showcase how popular a profession will become. So we'll look at three aspects of this, or at least problems around the pay gap between professions. The first is the political aspect. For some, this is when people have connections within a company that can affect their pay raise compared to others. And in this, Fang and his associates researched two companies and did two studies. What they looked at was the wage pay versus salary pay. They looked at firm corporations and regular businesses, political connections in the workplace, gender differences, race differences, and even education. So the figure above is a part of their research that showed interesting results. They found out that 3% of income variety came from class origin. That's like their background of socioeconomic class. And then 26% of variance in income was also because of class origin. But then if you look at it totally, or when they looked at it totally, it was 68% of class pay was because of this class origin. Continued, they did another search, where this time they chose to focus more on corporate executive firms and the gaps within them, specifically in China. So they found that political connections increase corporate executive compensation while decreasing pay for employees, much like the other study they found. And their study, he says, the research explains that the political factors are one of the determinants of the salary gap between senior executives and average employees listed among listed companies in China. So in this, senior executives have higher political connections, so they get paid more rather than just what they like to refer to as the rank and file employees. Another aspect from another study is the wage versus salary problem. And in this, the Huang, Yu, and Zhang chose to focus their research on corporate social responsibility, or CSR. And they wanted to know if frequent CSR disclosures would impact pay gaps between corporate executives and the rank and file workers in China. And they focused on stakeholders, not just the employees. And that's what the definition of corporate responsibility is. They focus on stakeholders rather than just the basic employees. So they found that the mandatory CSR disclosures follow the stakeholders' perspectives. They have a negative impact. The negative impact of the disclosures is more remarkable for companies in provinces with higher legal environments. It is more prominent in companies with stringent employee bargaining powers. So, in this, mandatory CSR disclosures reduce the pay gap between rank and file employees and executives because it showcases the stockholders' interests. Another aspect is the one that I mentioned in the beginning as the gender pay gap, something that has been done a lot in today's society. In this, Holly Eugen and her associates used a method called Delaware Decision-Making Study, which is a sample of incarcerated offenders to unpack the gender pay gap in illegal pay with the Blinder-Oaxaca decomposition technique. Now, they argue that it's important to look at the gender pay gap in legal crimes because if women face disadvantage in both legal and illegal markets, policies dedicated to improving legal labor market opportunities for women who engage in economic crimes might be especially promising. So they showcase both legal and illegal pay and look at if there is this so-called gender pay gap. And they found that more men are employed in secondary and entry-level occupations than women. And then women are paid less in legal pay than men. Now, the legal pay needs to be defined because it's not just like what most people think as, robberies and all that stuff. The legal pay in this can even mean just fraud or embezzlement or trying to do something where physically is illegal but not as illegal in the sense of others. In conclusion, the biggest thing to realize about this problem is that there are little to no sources about this problem itself. While these studies that I showcased get close, no articles or studies focus on why there is such a pay gap between professions. It's complex, but everyone either chooses not to see it or they just don't recognize it. It's just a way of life, in a sense. Instead, we choose to focus on pay gaps between executives and rank-and-file employees, or gender pay gaps. And this is due to the norms and focus on society today, which is constantly changing. But in this, why does a nurse make less than an NBA player when her impact is more of value? And these are the questions that bring to light this problem, but I do not think it will be explored more. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and here are the works cited.